Another tip or two for beginners, man, for welding on tubing. There's a couple pieces of 11 gauge for those of you that are just getting into it. Been using this Miller a lot lately. I like this little 215. It doesn't give me any problems at all. For you people that are just getting into it, the end of your wire there, right on the end of the wire, you get a little flare where the electricity is melting the wire and transferring it to the steel. So it's like you got a little flare on the end of your wire about the size of a match head. Wherever that match head's pointed, that's where your penetration is. So it's really important on smaller welds to make sure that that flare of that match head on the wire is right in the crack if you're doing a skinny bead, because otherwise, if you miss the crack, you didn't weld it together. So wherever your wire is pushed or pointed, that's where your penetration is going to be. So when you get on tubing, picked up one of these new silver markers, man. I like that. The old one just had that in, and it was gravity feed. You'd pull it out, but on a hot day, the lead would get so soft it'd stick in there. The new one's got a clicker on it, and you force feed it. I like it a lot better. Damn thing was kind of pricey, but anyhow, what you want to do on this thinner stuff is you always keep that, say this is your wire, you always keep your wire pointed into whatever's hardest to melt through on the joint that you're doing. So we're on this 11 gauge right here. This is pretty thin and it's a cut edge. That's going to melt the easiest right now. So the rest of all this, it's solid. There's no open edge, so it's not going to melt as melt away and wash an edge off, because there is no edge for it. So what you want to do on something like this is you'll come in here and you'll start your wire right over here on this corner of this tube right here, because that's the hardest to melt through. So you'll start right here on your corner. You might have to trigger it once or twice to get the gap filled, but once you take off welding, what you'll do is you'll stay right on this corner, stay pointed right at that corner, and you'll come up 3/16 of an inch. You'll come back down 1/8 of an inch. You'll pause for a second. The longer you pause, the wider your bead gets. So you'll come back down that 1/8. You'll pause for just a second, and then you'll use the force of that match head to wash your puddle to this edge. As soon as you see this edge melt off, and you get back off of it, and you jump back to this corner. You go up another 3/16, come down that 1/8 inch, pause for a second, use the force of the wire to push your puddle over. As soon as you see the edge melt off, you jump back onto that corner. Just keep doing that. Up 3/16, down 1/8, pause a second, use the wire and the match head, the electrical force to pull the puddle on over, consume your edge, jump back onto the corner. And you'll do the same thing in the flat. Basically, it's not that big of a deal on the one up top, but if you're doing your overhead, if this was upside down, say this was the bottom, you'll keep your wire pointed on this, because there's no open edge there. That's going to be harder to melt or blow a hole through than this right here. So on the overhead underneath, you'll keep your wire, and you'll start on the corner and keep it pointed on the solid part. And same thing, you'll just stay in the same spot, pause for a couple seconds, let your bead get wider and wider, and then at the last second, you'll take that puddle, use your wire and the match head to pull it over here. As soon as you see that edge melt off, get back off of it. Get back over here on the solid stuff. Jump on it forwards 3/16, come back 1/8, pause a second, use the wire and the arc force to pull the puddle down and consume this edge, and get back off the edge real quick. Get back up top, come this way 3/16, go back 1/8 of an inch. Pause a second, just like the vertical, and then use the force of the arc on the wire to pull your puddle over here. So everybody makes that mistake I thought the same thing in the beginning, but everybody makes that mistake. They think because you're doing an overhead, you want to turn it down. Well, when you turn it down, you decrease the arc force. So the less arc force you has, the harder it is for the wire or the stick or whatever you're using to transfer the filler metal to the steel. So, if anything, turn it up a little bit. That's what I always taught my guys. Don't turn it down, turn it up. But that's part of what I like about this gasless wire, too. This gasless wire, I don't change it at all. I run it the same on an overhead, the same setting for vertical ups and downs, and I run the same setting for flats. So You aren't monkeying around with your voltage all the time, you know what I mean? You can dial it in once and you're good to go. So, but the importance of getting that match head, quick story and then I'm done. At the cat supplier, we had some steel and it was beveled like that. These were like 1/2-inch plates, and that was about 6 inches. And they were welding it onto another flat plate here. And this one was just flat, there was no bevel, there was just bevel on the one. And this was, I don't know, 6, maybe 8 inches. And this was the same thing, it was equal on each side. And these pieces here, they were, you know, they were about 2 foot long. You know, so they're 2 foot long, and it was, I think it was about 1/2-inch plate. Well, one of the other guys was learning how to weld, and he showed it to me, and it didn't look bad, but he must have kept that match head all on one plate. I don't know if it was this plate or that plate, but rather than washing that match head and pushing it into there, and then pushing it back into here, and then pushing it back into there, he ran that whole joint with it all pushed in here, and just cold lapped the puddle onto the other side. So that's the importance of making sure this gets pointed at both pieces you're trying to tie together. When he was done with this, it was actually the cat supplier's production supervisor at the time, his production supervisor's kid. And he came and showed it to me. I mean, he's a nice enough guy and everything. And it didn't look bad. I mean, I was surprised. It looked pretty good. And it was kind of like his first day. Well, they took it over to the end mill, bolted it on the table. And these were big end mills. I mean, these things were 15, 16 foot tall. The tables on them were 8, 10, 12 foot, the amount of your parts on. They mounted up his little 2 foot long part or whatever and went to mill it. As soon as the end mill hit the plate, went to take off the back side, the whole thing fell in half. 2 feet long. He didn't get any penetration between the two. I don't know if it was this plate or this plate, like I said, but he didn't point that match head on the wire at both sides as he was going. So whatever he did, it was all on one side and just rolled to the other side. The puddle just rolled onto it. He didn't actually get the arc force of the wire to penetrate into the steel. So as soon as the end mill hit it, literally the back plate fell off, and that was the end of that. Get him out of here. But just wanted to pass that on when you're doing your thinner stuff. You know, for you newer people, man, keep your heat on the corner of the tube here. That'll work out best for you, and then wash it back over to the cut edge. That cut edge melts away a lot faster. And like I said in the other video, always do your overhead first while the steel's cold, and then do your vertical ups and downs, and then go to the top. If you do the top and the sides first, then that bottom's just smoking butt hot, and it's a lot hotter and a lot harder to pull off. So always do your overhead or the hard one while your steel's cold. I watched several people use that mentality on cert tests at the railroad, and it didn't work very good. They thought they'd just, you know, they ran their route with 045 core wire, 75-25 gas. You know, I'm going to let the weld cool down. Well, yeah, it cooled the weld a little bit, but it just heated the hell out of the steel around it. You know, did a second pass, they chipped it, and then let it sit for 20 minutes again. Well, they got about halfway through their test, and the whole coupon was so hot that they just had to abandon it and threw it to the side and started again. But always hit the hard one first while your steel's cold, and that's usually the overhead. But just a couple more tips for new people getting into it, man. Everybody be safe.